You're just spreading out.
Okay, so today we were going to focus on what we call role shifting. And it's because in spoken English, it's an oral language that's produced sequentially as an order. And most of the time in English, the order is important. So follow English order to make an English sentence. And ASL is a spatial language, and it's conveyed visually. It's conveyed and received visually. Because of these differences, the transliterator wants to retain the word order of English, but use the ASL feature of your space. And the English versus ASL. In ASL, you become the character. You act out the person or thing. For example, a teacher talking to a student or a parent with a child. In English, this is called direct address. This is when you directly talk to us. You know, Susie, I want you to do da la la. In English, we use that kind of speech when telling stories or jokes. You know, and so-and-so said blah, 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 and so-and-so said blah, blah, blah. Or when speaking to children. For example, Mother told Jane she wanted her to pick up her toys. The interpretation would be, Mother told to Jane, who's Mother Jane, I want you to pick up the toys. And direct address is, the mother said that she wanted her to pick up the toys. But you assign, you would become the mother and say, I want you to pick up the toys. Excuse me. So the sentence is restructured to include that direct address, but it's still following the English word order. In true ASL, you would probably you set up Mother, Jane, toys, Mom told her to pick up. And so in true ASL, we move it all around. But to transliterate, you can still use that character shift, become the mom, and say it like you would if you were the mom, but still keep that English word order. In English, a conversation is commonly communicated through indirect address. The mother told Jane that she wanted her to. So that's indirect. Direct is, Mom said, quote, I want you to pick up the toys. So ASL uses direct address and assumes the role of the character. So you'd be shifting your torso slightly left or right. This is why I hate to sit when I interpret. You just can't move. You just can't become. And then you use your eye gaze. If you set the people up left and right, you look at that. You become this person. You're looking at the other person, and then this person, you're looking at that person. Or up and down, like with a parent and a child. The parent would be looking down as they talk to the child. Or God talking to. I look down when I'm God talking to somebody. Or you're the child. You look up when you I'll never forget the first time I heard a deaf child whining to the parent. It's like, oh, parent doesn't even escape whining because the child is deaf. And still can do that in sign language. And then you show the affect of the person. All right, so let's look at this. Let's see. We want to keep the word order, but there's some places where you're going to change the indirect to direct. About that first sentence, what do you see? And again, even when you're transliterating, you remember that ASL puts the time first. So, and you should have heard the whole first sentence before your hands even start moving to interpret. So you can set up first that it was last Saturday. There's Joe, Saul, Jason, at the clubhouse. Joe's asking Jason how he is. How are you doing? So how do you change that to direct address? So you become Joe, and you just sign, how are you?
Yeah.
And then when Jason said that, so that whole thing right there, Jason said that, becomes he. That's how you do it, shift back into becoming Jason. He was just trying to figure out where he had put all the trophies when they remodeled the clubhouse. So how does that become direct? What's Jason going to be saying?
What were the trophies? Can't find.
Didn't say he's asking where yet. He said, I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out where are the trophies. In the past, we remodeled the clubhouse. Now, trophies. Where are they? When Joe asked him, if he had looked in the closet in the back room. You sign if.
I would say look in the back room closet.
Well, he's asking him.
Facial expressions, you don't have to.
You
Just say
don't
back
have to.
room, closet.
Looking. You can do the search for or the look. Yeah. He told him, he's back over here. He told him he thought that's where. Oh no, we're still Joe. He told him he thought that's where he'd seen them last. So. And Jason said that he had not looked there yet, but he'd give it a try. But not yet. But I'll try. He also told Joe, that whole thing, he also told Joe, just keeping in the character, that if he didn't have anything he needed to do right then, perhaps he could stay and give him a hand. Just sign that. Are you busy? You mind staying and helping? Joe said he'd be happy to stay and help for a while. So
He just said,
thank you.
I have a question. Every time I keep wondering this. If we sign this the way you're talking about, how close are we from ASL or how far are we from ASL? You're in between. You're somewhere in between.
You're using the ASL feature of becoming the person, but because you're transliterating, you're still keeping the more English word order.
Okay. But the deaf don't mind as long as you don't.
No, because it makes it clear.
Okay.
And in studies, or I guess polls or whatever, your facial expression and your non-manual markers and your use of space are things that deaf people will put down as being the most important thing an interpreter can have. So they'll forgive a lot of other stuff. Maybe.
Depends on the person.
Yeah.
So you're somewhere in between.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're using this ASL feature but you're still following that English, more in the English word order.
Just to give you an example, I was asked this morning about one of the interpreters that we used to have. And his facial expressions were so good, but that's what they remembered him by.
And you can't, I've had some deaf people say, I wish they wouldn't so much. You know, the interpreter learned to use facial expressions, and they were just like, you know, too much overuse. And over mouthing does not make it clearer. It makes it harder, actually. Yeah. Okay.
Mustaches and beards. Mustaches.
Mustache and beards. I don't know why they accept David, but they do.
Don't have a problem. But I keep it shut,
Yeah.
cut short so they can see the lips.
Right. Yeah. Can you think of, I think I use this most of all, well, a preacher may be given an example story where you would use it, or there's a lot of stories in the Bible where you need to become the characters. And that's a good way to practice, is to take some of those stories and to think about, you know, who do I become when, and how do I say this? Okay. Is there any questions? What other than the good one we've had already? We have another topic that I don't have a slide on, and I want to. It's kind of part of this too.
I have a question, but it's not really related. Is that okay?
Yeah.
But since I'm thinking of it.
Sure.
Usually when I interpret, I am just the speaker. Like I pretend like I'm them, and if they say I love cheese, then I just say I love cheese, you know? But one of the interpreters yesterday, whenever the speaker would say I would ever, she would like do this to him and then say I. Is that necessary or common or just maybe because she had spoken herself in the lesson and maybe that's why.
Maybe, yeah.
So
I mean, usually if you're interpreting and other people are speaking, you indicate who's speaking. But if you're the interpreter for that person that's here, if that's the role you've taken, the deaf audience understands when you say I, you don't mean yourself, you mean, oh, and this person.
that was probably just because she had made comments herself.
Yeah,
She
she stepped out and become herself instead of the interpreter. And that's another thing, it's hard for new interpreters to kind of learn to ignore, is when people make remarks about the interpreter. And to separate yourself from that, you're no longer that person, you're just the interpreter. So, you know, and I've seen, and I've had the people I'm kind of training right now at church, they would say, you know, I used that big word because I wanted, you know, Sally Smith to see how she would interpret it, and they would say how I would interpret it. Not what they said. They said Sally Smith. Just use your name, like you're not there. You're not there. You just keep going, you know. But it is hard. Had the speaker use me as a prop one time. Come over and put his arm around me. He's like, okay. Yeah.
I don't go on platform interpreting that because of them, but in smaller groups, like smaller than ITV or something like that, the group is small enough, I don't really have to index or, you know.
Right.
I can just, if somebody starts talking, I just point to the deputy, that one.
Yeah.
Or that
Yeah.
is talking.
Yeah, it depends on how big your group is. Yeah. And sometimes if it's a pretty big group, and I know, like in maybe a classroom setting, I've had deaf people like me to even add a little quick description. so they can like kind of look back and connect the comments to the person. They might want to go up to the person later and, you know, continue that conversation. So you just kind of add.
So pointing is the right method in a classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I usually will say whether it's boy or girl, you know, and you can expand, add a little bit more. The boy, and often they would turn around and quickly look to see at which time you're holding the information. And there's what he said. Yeah, I wish I'd had some kind of recording that I could have used to practice this. I know, what was that class I was interpreting? Was it Monday?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was, not, well, yeah,
It was
there was
the
a class
Bible.
yesterday too.
The
You
Bible
were
and science, that
the
Kyle
science
video.
thing, yeah.
Mhm.
There was some of that in it, but then yesterday in the women's class, ladies' class, the two things that I did a lot of that, you know, becoming the person or whatever, and the other part was, and I wish I had been able to hold on to all the phrases she used. You see, she used a lot of passive voice. I'm going to put this to. Let's see if we can go to.
If you want, I can pull up like scripture on my iPhone that will read out loud if you want me to pull up the story.
Yeah, I was thinking about the story about.
Do you have a
oh, I was
story you
supposed to-
prefer?
No. We'll get this. Not the subject.
It's underneath the podium there on the first side.
Language has two voices, and English uses both an active voice, which is a subject, verb, object, or a passive voice, which starts out with the object being the first word, followed by some form of to be. What are the forms of to be?
Is,
Okay. Is, am, are, was, were,
That thing has been
have, been, or has, but not has and have by themselves. Just has to be with the been. Another, or at least one more. No. And this, some form of this, is with another verb. There's always two verbs. This verb is what we call the past participle. Usually you'll see it with the ed form. There are several verbs, though, that have their own little special form of that, like shown, chosen, talked. With some other verbs with irregular past gone. Well, gone should go, but you can't make. You wouldn't say, I am going, it's still just the present tense. I am gone. Still, I'm gone. That's not passive voice.
Went.
Hmm?
I said went. We're not looking for that word, don't worry.
Just trying to think of some other examples of verbs that are past that don't use the ed construction. So say chosen, shown.
She said saw.
Saw. I don't think they'd ever used it with the is seen. Yeah. Saw is past, but it's not the perfect. So, as you're trying to figure out was that passive,
Went.
I went. I once went. I will be went. I don't think the form of go can be used in the passive voice. Because the ing construction still makes it present, or makes it. I have been going. Makes it ongoing. That's not a.
We went, he went, she went.
Yeah, but then you have to have two verbs. One of these and one of these. Often you'll hear the word by, and then you'll have what is really, who is doing the action, who or what is doing the action will be after the by. Sometimes this whole part is understood. Last Sunday, the preacher said, we are chosen. What do we understand in the church context to be the by God? God chooses us. So you have to do a whole one of these to make it, because ASL cannot be passive. All right, let's take an example. If you say, the boy kicked ball. Okay, that's an active sentence. You have the subject, the boy, you have an action, kick, and you have a direct object, what was kicked, the ball. So to change that to passive, often a person will do, they would say what? What's the direct object? The ball. Then what would your verb become? Was kicked. By the boy. So if you hear this one, which often you will hear that construction, if you'll pay attention and start Like I say, even you just sit and listen to a speaker, start keeping a little list of times that they say things like that, and how in your brain you would change it around. So the boy, the subject, ends up at the end. After a by, you have two parts to the verb. You have a part of the to be, and you have the past tense, the past part of it. And then the direct object, what was kicked, becomes the front part of the sentence.
What did the deaf think about the word by to begin with? Is that something
They
we
will
should cut?
they will use it just because I guess so many of them have been brought up with English. I see many of them. You know, if you sign, you could buy the boy. Really, in a deaf brain, they're going to go like, "Oh, the boy kicked the ball." So, as interpreters, our job is to interpret. Don't make them interpret. But I see many deaf people, and they probably don't understand this any better than we do. but because they're raised with an English, most of them have been raised with an English, being taught English, and using some, maybe even some form of sign English.
Classes, and they have to write English
Yeah.
properly
Yeah.
in school. So if the speaker spoke in the passive tense, past tense, the passive tense, the ball was kicked by the boy. The interpreter would sign more of the boy kicked the ball.
Yes. Yes.
This is exactly why we have so many deaf people coming to his office to help them read the letters that they receive.
Yeah. Yeah. And in English, we use a passive construction because it softens. It softens what you're saying. It's not as harsh. So,
Try to do it right the first time and try to avoid the vowel.
yes. Yeah. I know. Once you catch yourself doing the by, it's like, I should have done this. It takes a lot of practice, and I still get stuck. And it takes processing time. You cannot be right there with them word for word and get that, you know. If you've already started signing the boy, you're too late. I mean, the ball. If you've already started signing the ball, what? Yeah. The ball kicked the boy.
Yeah, ball boy.
The ball was kicked by the boy. You can do that.
Well, if you establish the ball and then say boy kicked it, that's one way to say
Yeah,
yourself.
so it'd be more
If you
ASL.
think about it in time.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's what she said.
Yeah. Let's see if it was. Let's see what other sentences she used. So let's see if we have another example here. How about if somebody just says, the jewelry was stolen? The jewelry was stolen, you know? And maybe you know from context who did it. Maybe you don't. So what's going to be moved here? You'd have to have something stole the jewelry. You could just do someone. Like I say, when the preacher said, we are chosen, he didn't say by God. But you understand that. It's a tacit understanding, implied information, inferred, implied. I always get those mixed up. Mhm.
Yeah, depending on context.
Right, yeah, that's what I say. Often in the context, you know what's after that. It's not stated, but you know that that's there.
So you would prefer someone stole the jewelry to jewelry someone stole,
No,
or
if they
someone
said the jewelry was stolen, you would have to change it to someone stole the jewelry to make it active.
So you would put jewelry before stole, or stole before jewelry.
Yes.
Could you just say jewelry stolen and the inference is somebody did it?
Again, I guess you need more of a context. You just don't want to sign that the jewelry stole. If you just sign jewelry still, looks like the jewelry somehow got the capacity to steal something.
Yeah, I guess my question was like whether like to have a someone, but would you do jewelry stolen or stole jewelry?
Stole jewelry. You have to make, because if you still say jewelry stolen, if you still sign jewelry still, it's looking like the jewelry is doing the action. So jewelry is what was stolen, not what is stealing. The jewelry disappeared. Who took it? Don't know. All right.
My cat did it. Look at my jewelry.
How about John was chosen by Sue? Now they're picking sides, and John was chosen by Sue. What would you change that to? Sue chose John. Okay. Another example of where you don't really have anything have a by is a new secretary will be hired. Well, depending on the setting you're in, if you're at the company where they're talking about it, who's going to be doing the hiring? The boss, somebody upstairs. And they will hire a new secretary. The contract was given to the Smith Company. And sometimes you might need to change your verb. It was given, so therefore these people had to do what? Receive, accept. Yeah, so you can change that to say the Smith Company received the new contract. Because we don't know where the contract's coming from. Or, I guess if you do know, if it's a government contract, the government gave them the contract. The student was taught fractions. So the was taught, what other verb can you change that to show that the student learned? Yeah, the student learned fractions. Okay. So, let's see, I was going to go back to just read you the definition again of when you have a verb that indicates whether or not the subject performs the action, the verb with the direct object is active voice. So you have something or someone doing something to something. You know it's a direct object because you can ask to or what or whom did this happen. It's fun interpreting in Spanish classes when the teacher's trying to teach the class how to use Spanish direct objects and indirect objects. And the kids don't even know what it is in English.
Yeah.
I remember one time the teacher broke it down so simply. The direct objects, one, there are these pronouns that you use, and you ask yourself to who or what did this happen? Indirect object, not those. And so she had her sentences, and she broke them into direct object and indirect object, and then she wanted to have, they were translating them. So they're going through, and they would pick an indirect object pronoun and put in a direct object, and she'd go like, okay, we're on direct object now. Pick from the list over here. And by the time we got about 2/3 of the way through the indirect object, and they're still picking from the direct object, she's like, I remember one time, I forgot which student it was, but they all had it all take Spanish names, and it was like, she said like, Antonio, honey, it's not a direct object. I almost lost it. I thought I was going to have to leave the room. I thought, okay, she was, and that teacher, the more frustrated she got, the more sarcastic she would get. And there were times when I would just almost lose it. But it's like, she's not going to be happy here for very long. She made it easy for you. Here's the list. These sentences are direct object. Here's the list. These sentences, use one of these. Pick it out. And it's like, oh, we'll just pick over here. Okay. And I know this is the hard thing. So, did you find a passage?
I did.
This would be our roll.
Let's see if I
Back
can
to
get
roll
this to work.
shifting.
I had to load a new Bible software, so I don't know. This should be Jesus and the Woman at the Well. Do you want me to just start it?
Jesus and the woman at the well. Who wants
If
to?
it'll play.
Who wants to become Jesus and the woman? And the disciples are in there sometimes too. So you might have to.
Do you want to be Jesus and I'll be the woman? She said roll.
I don't think you get to do that. When you're interpreting at church. Like, oh, you're telling a story. Hang on just a minute.
Come up here, help me
You
out.
be the woman, I'll be Jesus. Okay, go ahead.
Although that sounds like a fun game to try.
Yeah. Sounds like it would be really good, doesn't it?
I would think that would be the role of the interpreter taking over control of.
Might be a little ideas to get in. I'm going to start. Here.
John 4. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water.
Can you pause it just a second?
Give me a drink. For
All right. The woman's coming out, but where did it say Jesus is? Sitting. So Jesus is going to be sitting. So what is the eye gaze going to be? The Jesus is going to be looking down.
Yes,
When the woman comes out, he could be looking out at the mountains in the field. But when the woman comes up, Jesus is sitting. So when you become Jesus, and you might even want to like move your legs down a little bit. Look at the kind of not totally up like a child would to a parent, but you want to have a little upward eye gaze. Okay.
Could you see that just a little? Thanks. Am I still on?
Sorry, I tried to change Bibles to one that didn't have the music, but
Oh.
Yes, there's music. I know. Names. You went all around.
If the viewing audience is not going to leave with that name in their head, Don't get hung up on it.
I know. That's what we always said. We come back and I don't know what he said.
Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well?
Okay, that was kind of a little forward of where we aren't she?
Give me a drink. His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her,
Don't sign Jesus' name, just
and
because
who it is that is saying to you, Give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it? Jesus said to her, Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water. Jesus said to her, Go, call your husband and come back. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know.
That's good. Good. Fine. So you begin to not sign.
Yeah.
The woman said, Jesus said. That's hard too. It takes practice to remember to become. And it doesn't hurt a time, 1 or 2 times at the beginning to do that so that people remember this is the woman and this is Jesus. But you don't have to just keep going on and on and on. Plus it makes it hard to become.
It's easier to interpret when you don't have to add all that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it just gives you 3 words. And Jesus responded. It gives you 3 words to wait and
see what he's saying.
Okay, and I can hear the rest of it. And get
I think it's harder to remember to have to, that if Jesus is over here, do I turn this? I think that's hard to remember too.
We have to become the person.
Yeah.
Basically, you got to set it up beforehand. When it starts,
when you start,
you sign to Jesus, and then you're facing one way. Then as soon as he changes to the woman, and you sign the woman, you want to go to the other way. Now they know where both of them are.
Right. And the other thing is, in the middle of some of the conversation, there was just narrative. When it's not part of the conversation, it's just the narrator adding a little thought there. You come back to neutral and just put it out like this, and they know that this is not either one of the people. It's not part of the conversation.
When you start a conversation like that, which side do you start with? I mean, dominant or non-dominant?
I usually set up first person here and the second person here. I don't know if it matters.
She does left and then right.
You
Some people do right and then left.
And, I don't know that it's important. The importance is that you set them up and keep them there unless they move. If it said, and Jesus went over behind her. Oh, hey. I'm over here now. I mean, and I've heard different opinions. So
I heard yesterday that you start on the right. What's the matter with right? What's the
Yeah,
matter
I
with
can't remember
right.
which
middle.
class.
I might have said that about indexing.
That might have been indexing.
They do
But I
that,
think
but
I tend to sit there.
when you get old and your shoulders get sore, as you start interpreting, if you're doing it, your right hand arm gets sore, you always switch to the left and you continue on like nothing happened. The deaf don't notice the difference. We was sitting and watching the one interpreter, and I turned to her. I says, Wanda Cobb. I says, what hand she using?
Yeah.
She had to stop and think that she was signing left-handed. The deaf do not notice, really.
I follow left-handed people better because it's your mirror.
That's true. Yeah.
But I've noticed that there's people that sign left-handed, right-handed, or they'll sign both. And they switch back and forth, and the deaf do it too.
I have forms to fill out. Okay, well, I hope that was informative and something for you to listen for. And even if you're not the active interpreter, it might be that you could write these things down as you hear them. I did that with idioms. I used to do that with idioms. So then later I could think about them. And, there's some things you need to think about and practice without being on the hot seat and actually doing the work.
I noticed when she was interpreting, she did something interesting. She said, "Spirit, truth, both." What is the deal with "and"? Is that something we should avoid if possible?
With and?
Yeah, the deaf have problems with something and something and something.
No, not necessarily.
That's just her style.
Oh.
She's different.
Actually, I kind of like "Spirit, truth, both." I kind of like that, actually.
Yeah,
It's
kind of what we call it's not an addition in that you're adding information that wasn't there, but sometimes in interpreting you need to expand the thought because in our hearing minds, when we hear that in spirit and truth, we know it means both of them. So to add the sign both just expands the meaning of what you just said.
I didn't know this is definitely.
Here's today's.
Yeah, I was just looking for the others.